Welcome back. Another quality common among livable cities is walkability. Here are some examples of how citizens are reclaiming the streets and transforming parts of the city into car-free zones for pedestrians only.
Up until cars became popular, cities were entirely walkable. But cars have altered the way cities are designed, the way people move, and where they can and cannot congregate. But some cities are changing their priorities, taking back the streets from cars and freeing up the space for citizens to converge, just like the old days. In most cases, pedestrianization means closing a few main streets to traffic. The historic heart of Vienna is a good example of how main avenues have been converted into pedestrian shopping streets. Since doing so, business in the area has boomed, while accidents, air, and noise pollution levels have decreased. Rue Sainte-Catherine in downtown Bordeaux is much the same. The longest shopping street in Europe has been car-free since the 1980s. The pedestrian zone was expanded and extended in recent years to include the Place de la Comédie and streets around it, a boon for retail, tourism, and real estate values in the district. Emerging cities like Ljubljana are more aggressive. The pedestrianization of the city center is at the heart of the urban renewal program of the Slovenian capital. The city was named Europe's Green Capital in 2016. Since 2007, more than 30 streets and squares have been closed to vehicles entirely. Access by cars is restricted to those with special permits, and a handful of public electric vehicles that ferry the disabled and the elderly. In most parts, cycling is the only other way to travel, apart from walking. Ljubljana gives us an idea of what a city looks like when you divert cars away from the city center. You find things like a thriving outdoor farmers market where a parking lot once stood, public art and cultural events on bridges and squares where vehicles once ruled. All over the city you see sidewalk cafes and street carts selling local crafts and food, places and spaces once choked by exhaust fumes. Cleaner, greener, safer, and with a vibrant street life to boot, young families are returning to the city center from the suburbs to live and work in Ljubljana, now one of the most livable capitals of Europe. Pedestrian zones are hardly new. Paris's 19th century covered walkways, the Passage, were the first to implement the urban concept. But pedestrianization is no longer restricted to shopping streets and historic districts. In emerging global cities like Zagreb in Croatia, we're seeing it spread to other parts of the metropolis. Walkability is a hot urban trend, but pedestrian zones are easier to implement in compact cities. For sprawling urban centers like Tokyo, however, the next best thing is mixed-use developments. A space where people live, work, and play in the same place. A city within a city, if you will. Like what we found in Siódome, east of the JR Shinbashi station. A new and massive 310,000 square meter business and leisure complex with exceptional transport connectivity.
Siódome is a model of modern urban planning and regeneration. As you can see here, they have dedicated platforms for trains, for pedestrians, and for cars beneath. It manages traffic better and makes the city more livable.
In space-starved Tokyo, the only way to build is up. Siódome goes a step further with a vertical community connected by elevated gardens and walkways, and train stations suspended in the air. And to give the feel of an authentic neighborhood and a genuine sense of community, landowners and leaseholders designed some details of the outdoor space. Public areas are cleaned and maintained by the community, rather than a cold and faceless government entity.
Redesigning urban space for public use isn't always easy, especially in heavily built-up districts, and that's why urban planners are taking a second look at the riverbanks and waterways of the city.
Rivers and canals used to be the lifeblood of cities, the main transport and commercial highway. But railways and roads changed the role of waterways, leaving urban waterfronts and riverbanks to slowly rot away. The rehabilitation of the Singapore River through a major cleanup campaign and the relocation of informal settlers shows us how riverbanks can be transformed into a vibrant public and commercial space. In just over 4 decades, the riverbank of Singapore's main waterway has become a proud icon of the city-state, the preferred site for luxury resorts, monumental buildings, and retail space. Copenhagen's harborfront and canals have experienced a similar fate. Swimming and boating are common activities in its waters these days, and locals take time to enjoy the bike lanes and footpaths that line the city's waterway. About 15 years ago, the water was polluted with sewage, algae, oil spills, and industrial waste. But stricter anti-pollution laws and public investment in wastewater treatment have made water sports and leisure boating possible again. Kayaks are even offered free of charge, so long as you collect floating garbage along the way. The harbor's revival has encouraged real estate development as well. An apartment along the harbor today is considered a prime address in Copenhagen. And more houseboats are finding a new home docked along the waterway. Moving more activity to the harborfront also helps decongest the inner city. Dining, shopping, or simply hanging at the docks has become an integral part of city living, an iconic Copenhagen experience that also generates tourism. The developers of the Dubai waterfront are just as aware, and with the huge resources at the disposal of the Arab Emirate, they've achieved the impossible, carved out a canal and marina from the sand, and expanded the waterfront. Urban planners are split about Dubai's ambitious designs. Most agree the newly built islands and canals have added a significant amount of precious waterfront real estate in an otherwise dry and dreary emirate.
If this is your first time in Dubai, all this might seem really natural, but it's not. This canal we're on, it's actually pretty new. It has no purpose other than as a decorative factor. That's the thing about Dubai. They'll spend just to make the city beautiful and attractive to visitors.
But then again, the artificial canal helps cool the desert atmosphere as well, and provides critical pedestrianized space for the public along the banks of the waterway. All the cities we've featured so far have succeeded, not just because of money or clever urban planning blueprints. Political will and civic engagement is more likely the key, as we discovered in Bordeaux's successful urban renewal strategy. Bordeaux is one of France's most elegant and livable cities today, but when the city mayor first took over the reins in 1995, the historic downtown was better known for gridlock and grime. Today, we can admire the Garonne River waterfront and its wide open space. The splendid architecture with icons like the Place de la Bourse and the Miroir d'Eau reflecting pool. All this was made possible by clearing the docks and warehouses that once stood in the way. With hundreds of listed historical buildings, Bordeaux is a UNESCO World Heritage Site, though not too long ago, these old walls and streets were blackened with soot and grime. To reduce air pollution, carbon emissions, and traffic jams, streets in the center were pedestrianized and electric trams were launched. Annual civic events and new museums were introduced as well to create civic pride and solidarity among citizens. And as we speak, more parts of the city are undergoing rehabilitation and redevelopment. What these samples teach us is that it's possible for cities to improve. Not easy, not cheap, but possible. It could start with an affordable pedestrian project like Ljubljana's. more cycling paths like Copenhagen's? Or something more ambitious like Tokyo's subway system? Or Bordeaux's holistic approach to urban regeneration? The strategies may be different, but we all agree that change needs to start somewhere.
And that's all for this episode of Executive Class. Hopefully we can learn from the world's most livable cities. Remember, think possible. I'm David Celdran. Thanks for watching.